Before we begin, I want to welcome you to our channel. For those who are new here, our mission is to share genuine Christian testimonies from around the world, spreading the powerful message of God's kingdom. We focus on stories about Jesus, the afterlife, heaven and hell, and other Bible-related topics, bringing them to you in engaging story form twice or 3 times a week. We invite you to become a member of this family by subscribing to our channel. God bless you as you do so. Hi, friends. Today's experience is that of a sister who died and saw 2 of her children tormented in hell for reasons that will shock you. Kindly stay to the end to fully understand her experience. My name is Shidi Bernard. I don't know how to begin this experience because I feel like I've spent my whole life running from responsibility, and now I've run straight into the consequences of it all. My name is Maria, and I never thought much about being a mother. It wasn't something I dreamed of or prepared for. When Caleb was born, I felt trapped, like my freedom had been stolen. And then, 2 years later, Nia came along, and I felt even more suffocated. Instead of rising to the challenge, I turned away from it. I poured my energy into anything that made me forget I had children who needed me. I gave them the bare minimum: a roof, food on the table, and clothes. That was it. I thought that was enough. Caleb and Nia grew up like weeds in a neglected garden, wild and unkempt. I was too busy chasing my own pleasures, parties, men, and a drink in my hand more often than not. My life was a blur of distractions. I'd hear Caleb and Nia crying some nights when they were younger, but I just turned the volume up on the TV. I didn't want to deal with their needs or their fears. I didn't want to deal with them. I told myself they'd figure things out. Kids do, don't they? I mean, I had it rough growing up, and I survived. But what I didn't realize, or refuse to admit, was that I was leaving them to fend for themselves in a world that would chew them up and spit them out. By the time Caleb was a teenager, he was barely home. I knew he was getting into trouble, but I never asked questions. He'd come back late at night with bruises on his face or cash in his pockets, and I didn't care to know how he got them. Nia followed her brother's example, but in her own way. She became obsessed with looking pretty, with being noticed. At 15, she was wearing makeup that made her look older and hanging around with men I knew were no good. I'd see her sneak out of the house dressed like she was heading to a club, but I didn't stop her. I didn't care enough to stop her. I was too busy living my own life. I spent my days nursing hangovers and my nights chasing the next thrill. I barely noticed when Caleb started talking in that harsh, angry tone, or when Nia's eyes grew hollow and distant. They were slipping away, but I was too blind, or maybe too selfish, to see it. One night, Caleb came home with a gun tucked into his waistband. I saw it, but I said nothing. What was I supposed to say? I'd never given him rules, so why start now? A week later, he came home with blood on his shirt. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. He was already lost to me, and deep down, I think I knew it. Caleb was part of some gang by then, and his life revolved around violence, theft, and gambling. He lived for the adrenaline rush, and I guess it made him feel powerful, like he was in control of something for once. Nia's path was no better. By 16, she was practically living at parties. Drugs became her escape, and her social media was filled with pictures of her in skimpy outfits, chasing likes and attention. She thought she was building a glamorous life, but she was only digging herself deeper into a pit of emptiness. She'd come home at dawn sometimes, strung out and barely able to stand. I'd see her stumble into her room and close the door, and I'd just shrug it off. She'll learn, I told myself. It's just a phase. But it wasn't a phase. It was a downward spiral. Everything that happened was like a dream. Too quick. The call came late one night. Caleb had been killed in a gang fight. He'd been shot in the street, left bleeding out while his so-called friends ran away. The news hit me like a brick to the chest, but not because I felt the loss. No, it was guilt that tore into me. Caleb had been my son, my baby, and I had let him slip through my fingers like sand. I hadn't protected him. I hadn't guided him. I hadn't loved him the way a mother should. 2 days later, Nia died. She overdosed at some party, her body found sprawled on a dirty floor, surrounded by strangers who didn't care. When I heard the news, I crumbled. Both my children were gone, and I was left with nothing but silence and the unbearable weight of knowing it was my fault. The grief was unlike anything I had ever known, consuming me from the inside out. When Caleb died, it felt like my chest had been hollowed out. 2 days later, when I learned about Nia, it felt like the world had stopped spinning altogether. My heart was broken, not just because I had lost my children, but because I knew, deep down, it was my fault. I stopped eating. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. I couldn't sleep. My dreams were haunted by their faces, by the lives they lived, and the lives they could have had if only I had been better. My days became a blur of silence and regret. The house felt so empty now, its walls echoing with memories I had tried to ignore for years. I felt it the moment my body gave out. My chest tightened, and a sharp pain spread through me. I clutched at my heart, but there was no one there to help. I sank to the floor of my living room, the same room where I had spent countless nights ignoring Caleb and Nia's cries for attention. My vision blurred as the pain overwhelmed me. The last thing I saw was the couch where Caleb used to sit, waiting for me to notice him, and the corner where Nia used to play with her dolls before she gave up trying to catch my attention. Then, everything went dark. I saw myself floating. The floating stopped suddenly, and I felt myself falling, faster and faster, as if being pulled by an unseen force. The air grew hotter, thicker, and heavy with the stench of burning flesh. My stomach twisted as the sounds of screams began to fill the space around me. Screams so loud and so agonized they made my ears ring. When I landed, it wasn't on solid ground. The surface beneath me was jagged and burning, glowing red like molten rock. I stumbled, the heat searing my skin, though I wasn't consumed by it. My surroundings came into focus, and what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. I was standing in a vast, fiery expanse that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky above was a swirling mass of dark smoke and glowing embers, and the air itself felt alive, heavy with despair. All around me were shadows, figures writhing in torment, their cries mingling into a cacophony of suffering. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the world I knew. The air was thick, heavy with a heat that clawed at my skin. Shadows loomed everywhere, shifting and alive, whispering things I couldn't understand. The ground beneath me was cracked and burning, the edges glowing red as if the earth itself bled fire. I knew where I was. Hell. The realization hit me like a hammer, and fear rooted me in place. Before me was a vast, desolate expanse, filled with screams that chilled me to the bone. The sound was endless, overlapping cries of agony that rose and fell like waves. I felt pulled forward, not by choice but by some unseen force. My feet dragged, trembling as I walked deeper into the chaos. That's when I saw Caleb. He was chained to a massive wheel, one so large it reached into the dark, smoke-filled sky. The wheel turned slowly, grinding with a deafening creak. Caleb's body was lashed to it, his arms and legs stretched taut by chains that glowed red-hot, as if forged from fire itself. As the wheel turned, his body was crushed under its weight, bones breaking with sickening cracks, only to reform again moments later. The pain was written across his face, raw, unending, and unbearable. "Caleb!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with desperation. I tried to run to him, but my feet felt glued to the fiery ground. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mix of anguish and accusation. "Why, Mom?" His voice was raspy, weak from endless crying. Why didn't you teach me? Why didn't you stop me from becoming this? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. What could I say? That I hadn't cared enough? That I had let him drift into a life of violence because it was easier than stepping in? The guilt crushed me, heavier than the weight of the wheel that tormented him. I reached out, but I couldn't touch him. The shadows between us thickened, mocking me. Then I saw Nia. She was in a room, if you could call it that. The walls were made of mirrors, each one cracked but still reflecting her image. She stood in the center, trembling, as the mirrors came alive. Each one replayed a moment from her life. The first time she snuck out, the first pill she swallowed, the first time she let someone use her. Scene after scene played in an endless loop, showing her spiraling deeper into a life of destruction. The mirrors began to shatter one by one, and with each shatter, sharp fragments flew toward her. They cut into her skin, deep gashes that made her cry out in pain. But the mirrors would reform instantly, whole again, ready to shatter once more. It was an endless cycle of torment. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the blood from her wounds. You were supposed to show me the way, she sobbed, her voice breaking. But you didn't care. You let me fall. Her words hit me harder than the flames around me. I wanted to tell her I was sorry, that I regretted every moment I had ignored her, but the words caught in my throat. My arms felt heavy, useless, as I tried to reach for her. Nia! I shouted, but it was no use. She couldn't hear my apology, even if I could force it out. Her cries of pain filled the space, mixing with Caleb's screams, a symphony of suffering that I couldn't escape. I tried to move closer to them, to hold them, to do something, anything to ease their pain, but I couldn't. Shadows rose around me, wrapping themselves around my legs and arms like chains. They whispered in my ears, voices that sounded like my own. This is your fault. You failed them. You were never a mother. The words burrowed into me, deeper than any knife could. Flames licked at my feet, rising higher with each moment, burning my skin but never consuming me. The pain wasn't just physical. It went deeper, burning into my soul. I screamed, not just from the pain but from the unbearable weight of my guilt. I saw every moment I had chosen myself over my children, every time I had turned away when they needed me. The shadows forced me to watch it all, the scenes playing out like a cruel movie. In front of me, Caleb's will turned on. Nia's mirrors shattered and reformed endlessly. Their cries joined mine, a chorus of regret and agony that would never end. I knew then that this was my punishment, not just the flames or the shadows, but the knowledge that I had failed them. I had let them walk into darkness, and now we were all paying the price. Instantly, I was back to myself in the hospital. A lot happened after my return, but that will be for another day. Raising children is one of the greatest responsibilities entrusted to parents. As believers, we are called to see our children not just as gifts from God, but as souls entrusted to our care, souls meant for eternity. The way we raise them shapes their lives here on earth and influences their eternal destiny. The Bible is clear in its admonition. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22 verse 6. This instruction is not a suggestion. It is a divine mandate. As parents, our role is to guide our children in the fear of the Lord, teaching them his ways, and modeling a life that honors him. When children are raised to fear the Lord, they learn to respect his authority, obey his commandments, and seek his guidance in all they do. Without this foundation, they are left vulnerable to the influences of a world that often denies God and promotes values contrary to his word. This brings us to the end of today's experience. Kindly like and share this video with your friends and families. Kindly subscribe to our channel and turn on your notification bell icon to be the first to get updated anytime we upload a new experience sent to us. Remain blessed.